Past 11, so I'm going to start the webinar. My name is Ian Fletcher. I'm the Director of Policy at the British Property Federation, and really glad to be doing this webinar in conjunction with Just Build Homes. And I'll introduce Millie in a moment, but yeah, the title of the session, Lessons in Love, How Do We Get Communities to Support Development? For those old enough to remember, Lessons in Love, a nod to level 42. For those that, yeah, I remember that band from the 80s. The background to this is that I'd met Wyn Evans at Housing 24 from Shared Voice, and Wyn had sort of set out some of the lessons that have been learnt via the Just Build Homes work that they've done, the research that they've done, and I thought this would be something that would be really useful to expose to the BPF membership. Yeah, we hear a lot about frustrations in terms of trying to get particularly rental living products across the line and through the planning application process, and a lack of knowledge of build to rent and other rental products and their benefits. So I'd wanted to have a session on community engagement, but to broaden that out a bit and to look at all kinds of developments. And we've got a very experienced and broad, in terms of skills base, sort of panel for you today. Before we get started, I'd like to ask my colleague to bring up the first poll. We thought we'd have a sort of bit of audience participation at the start. So if Hadar could bring that up. There we go. And please participate. Please give us your views. While you're doing that, I'll make introductions to the panel. So, as said, I'm absolutely delighted to be co-hosting this webinar today with Millie Dodd, who is a Senior Communications and Marketing Manager with Shared Voice, and is going to start us off by talking about some of their experiences. I'll then ask Ben Townsend, who is a new business director at L&Q, to take us through his experiences at that large housing association. Does a lot of mixed use development and those sorts of things. I'm then going to turn to James Simonson, who is a Strategic Communications Director at Turley. James is formerly of this parish in terms of being an ex-employee of BPF, where he did a lot of work on residential property, also led our BPF Futures network for some time as well. And then delighted to also introduce Rory Keys, who's a Regional Investment and Acquisition Director at Sigma. Sigma are very well known for their work across the country, particularly on the single family offer in the housing market. So each of those is going to give their perspectives. We're then going to have a bit of a discussion around some of the points that are sort of drawn out from those, and then let the audience participate in some Q&A for the last 15 minutes or so. If you have questions, I'd urge you to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function, and I'll pick them up there, but I'll also keep an eye on the chat function in case any go into that part of the software. So if I can ask Hadar, just before I turn to Millie, to conjure up the results of the poll. Yeah, quite positive there, Millie. A lot of people are doing some mobilization of supportive community voices. It makes absolute sense. Sort of split, however, according to whether they're doing it all the time, most of the time, occasionally, and nobody said never, so that's good. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to you to introduce the work of Just Build Homes.
Good morning, and thank you all for attending our webinar this morning. Just Build Homes exists to connect supporters of house building with the planning process. And it started because figures show year on year that the majority of people in every area of the UK do support building more homes and development as a whole. But when you attend consultations and look on planning portals, read local Facebook groups, it's usually dominated by those who do not want to see new homes go ahead. And this isn't because people don't support new homes and development, it's because supporters aren't being reached in the traditional planning process. From my own experience, before I started working with Just Build Homes, I'd never got involved in the traditional planning process, despite being priced out of my local area and still living at home with my dad after graduating university. And I think this is partly because if you have a full-time job or if you have a family, you don't have time to go to consultations at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. Navigating planning portals is time consuming and confusing. You trawl through hundreds of documents to find out what housing is even being offered, which is usually hidden behind jargon and percentages. In my own local authority as well, when I did support a scheme through Just Build Homes, when I checked the planning portal, it was uploaded as an objection. And when I queried this, they said they don't usually get letters of support, so there's nowhere for it to be housed. And I think things like this really highlight that the planning process in traditional comms is set up to appease people who are never going to change their mind about new development, and we're ignoring those who stand to gain the most from new homes going ahead. So what is Just Build Homes doing differently to motivate and engage this audience that is perceived as being hard to reach? First of all, we speak to them about issues that matter to them in a language that they understand. We speak to them on social media, which is where they usually are. And we take away the confusion and complication of planning portals, enabling supporters to contribute to the official planning process in 2 clicks. We've now worked on over 120 projects across the UK, and we have a database of over 10,000 and growing YIMBYs who have all supported a project in their local area through Just Build Homes. And when you speak to supporters of house building, they will often share their own personal experiences of the housing crisis. And I wanted to share with you an example of a supporter that used Just Build Homes. So Louise, a 49-year-old renter in London, said, "The situation in Wandsworth is really bad. My daughter, despite saving up, still can't afford a place and is forced to live with me. So we need to build more of all types of homes so the next generation has a real chance of moving out on their own. This development provides opportunities for people like her who are currently priced out of the housing market." Decision makers then end up with an evidence base of genuine local people who have shared their stories about the housing crisis with the reasons why they want to see more homes built in their area through individual local letters of support on the planning portal. I've been speaking at planning committees recently on behalf of local supporters of house building, and at the most recent one in Arran, these letters of support that outlined the personal experiences of residents changed the conversation and the narrative in the room from one of policy to the ones of recognising the needs of local people in the area, including the chair of the council who referenced his own daughter who was struggling to find housing, and this application was approved. So on the whole, Just Build Homes is changing the narrative around development, amplifying the voices of the silent majority so that the homes that we need can be approved and built by engaging and motivating an audience that would not have got involved in the planning process otherwise.
Thanks very much, Millie, and thanks very much to Sohail for putting a first comment in the chat there, which will pick up in discussion. So grateful to you, Sohail. Thank you. I'm going to turn next to Ben to give his experiences from an L&Q perspective.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Millie. So, yeah, I'm from L&Q. For those who don't know, we're a housing association based in London with 110,000 homes, so currently housing about 250,000 people, but also with one of the largest development programs in the country, delivering around 3,000 a year. And we regularly consult with communities in which we develop, whether that's new interventions in those areas or whether it's our existing customers and neighbourhoods. And there are some different approaches we take based on schemes, but generally we would always advocate genuine consultation with residents and listening to their concerns and trying to answer questions. And also putting forward our model, which is to deliver mixed tenure homes. So we will always deliver 50% market sale and 50% affordable homes, which can often take some of the objection away from local residents who feel that homes aren't being built for them, because we do build homes for everyone. We'd also often sell the benefits as well. The L&Q approach is to build strategic projects and develop at scale. So we often will try to do placemaking activities and invest for the long term, setting high quality design standards from the start. And again, that's difficult for local residents to object to if they can see examples of what we've done. We do really try to sell the benefits of our work. We do take slightly different approaches when it comes to different tenures that we're developing in order to answer questions from residents and local people. Often when we're delivering homes for sale, people are interested about what's going to benefit them. We take an approach of investing in those areas. At Barking Riverside, for example, in East London, we've jointly funded with the GLA a new overground station and the extension of the Uber boat service from central London, as well as community facilities and parks and other local amenities and schools. So it's important to explain to people that delivery of new homes does also provide new services and amenities for everyone's benefit, as well as providing access to areas that possibly sometimes weren't accessible before, and in that case it includes the River Thames. With homes for rent, we often find that by delivering a range of tenures, it's important to do some myth busting with local residents who might have concerns or pre-arrived at assumptions about homes for rent or homes for shared ownership or supported housing. So a lot of our work is about doing that, explaining to people what these different tenures mean, and also highlighting the real need. We're part of a project in London where we're looking to tackle the temporary accommodation crisis, where currently 1 in 23 children in London live in temporary accommodation. The costs of this are astronomical and borne by local authorities, and obviously in response to that, council taxpayers. But there's also huge ethical and long-term implications of that situation. So by building new homes for a range of tenures, we can help to tackle that. We also try to set out the basis on which existing communities can engage with new residents and how that can benefit them in the long term. And at Barking Riverside, again, we've set up a community interest company, which is led by residents and will ultimately take over the management of the area, bringing together new and existing residents before. And we also tackle regeneration of existing estates and ensure that we try to offer a beneficial offer to our customers, making sure that we understand their needs and that wherever possible we can meet those in terms of new development. And approaching development on that basis where it's informed by need and not just profit, although we do need to make a profit to fund this, is really important. And I think it can help people to understand why development is so important. There's obviously sustainability considerations as well. And in our regeneration approaches, we're keen to sell the benefits of investment in existing homes, providing new homes that might be more energy efficient and tackling the running cost challenges that some residents will have. Ultimately, though, I think in our experience with residents, it can come back to particular items like parking, overlooking, or issues with density. And so again, I come back to the original point, which is that it's important to have genuine and open consultation. So you listen to people's concerns, answer their questions, and then you're able to sell the benefits at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben. A lot there. Homes for everyone, myth busting around particular tenures. That sad statistic, 1 in 23 children in temporary accommodation, and selling some of the benefits, community interest companies, regeneration of existing estates, etc. So a lot there to unpack. Next, I'm going to turn to James and ask James to give us his introductory remarks.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Billy, Ben, and Rory as well. So I'm James. I'm from Turley. We are a built environment consultancy. I run our London and South East strategic communications team, and what we focus on is planning communications, insight-led communications, and corporate comms across the built environment. We've supported projects and clients from inception all the way to operation of their assets, but more often than not, we find that engaging early is the key to support, and I'll touch on how and why we do this in a second. But I think some initial sort of thoughts on what's been said so far. Targeting supporters is a really important part of what should be a multifaceted engagement strategy, but it is only one part. On the other end of the scale, you've got to engage with those impacted justify a proposal and also engage to minimize objections. And that means engaging effectively, early, comprehensively, not just prior to submission and not just during determination. And I think it's important to remember that engaging effectively is also in and of itself a good thing. Developers have a responsibility to engage with everyone who may be impacted by development, so that they're good actors in the community within which they hope to exist. And it's also really important to tailor an engagement strategy to the project's stakeholder community context. At the end of the day, it is still councillors who will vote on planning applications, not the community. And those councillors need to be convinced in a variety of ways that what you're proposing is the right solution for their community. So if I just touch on sort of how and why we do early engagement, it's a key way in our view for us to build support and minimize objections when it comes to planning. What early engagement involves is talking to local groups and neighbours at the concept or inception stage of a project, rather than bringing a fully fledged plan to consultation. And it can involve taking a social value approach where you look at understanding the markers of deprivation and local needs and how you can respond to that community context through your proposals and not just plonk an idea onto a site. If you don't understand the community within which you hope to exist, you're less likely to get support for what you propose to do. We've worked with lots of clients who engage early to identify and collaborate with local stakeholders to address local needs and wants. And that could include incorporating community infrastructure, it could be housing local charities, or it could be more generic solutions that the community is asking for, like good quality open space. And doing this early engagement and collaboration in turn actually creates advocates for proposals, because you end up with local groups and organisations who are reaping the benefit of what you are proposing to deliver in the community. And those groups and organisations can often be a more powerful voice than a collective of supporters putting in statements of support. I think sort of to sum up, there's also some context where you have to deliver proportionate engagement, and we see quite a lot of a difference between greenfield development and some other forms of development where you may take a more proportionate approach because there is a limited perception of benefit in the community for greenfield development. And I think there's also a perception in communities that they've been slammed with speculative applications. So you're kind of starting so far on the back foot that it's really hard to build support in those scenarios. And sometimes it's best just to engage proportionately. But in the majority of projects and cases that we undertake, and particularly in town centres and city locations where development is a lot more accepted and is kind of part and parcel of living in a city, we find that engaging early and building support that way is the best way to approach engagement and planning. But I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, James. And again, drawn out some points I think that'll maybe come up in discussion. Early engagement, trying to ensure that you're engaging with not just the community, but councillors at the end of the day, make the decisions, trying to take a holistic approach, put it into context and sort of greenfield, brownfield. So thank you for those contributions, James. And last but not least, Rory, Sigma have been so prolific in delivering a lot of new, particularly single-family developments over the country. I'm sure you've got some perspectives and lessons to give. So over to you.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks to my fellow panelists. Some great points made already this morning. From our perspective, Sigma Capital is sort of the leading developer of single-family housing in the UK, specifically in the build-to-rent space. To date, we have either built or are delivering circa 12,000 single-family homes across the UK. That is long-reaching from as far sort of southwest as Exeter, right up to the northeast in Newcastle, Middlesbrough, Sunderland, these types of places. So we have a wide experience of all different types of local authorities, all different types of processes. We are predominantly partnership led, so we are generally part of a triple tenure or at least a double tenure scheme. I think the common theme for us from a sort of planning and community engagement perspective is, and to paraphrase a few prime ministers, is education, education, education. It's just letting both local residents, local NIMBYs, local YIMBYs, hopefully in some instances, and committee members about what we do in terms of the benefits of single family. And to touch on Ben's point, it is that sort of approach. It's just giving your time generously, being available, not shying away from the consultation events, and being very upfront with what it is we do, what it is we offer our tenants, and the benefits of that to a local community and local marketplaces. So we are obviously professionally managed. We're a much higher quality product than traditional rental properties. Usually what you find is when people hear build to rent, there's an element of fear there because they don't understand it. So our job is really just to be there to show them what we do, give our time generously, and explain the benefits, as I've said. We have done a number of surveys which are available on our website about the benefits of single family development in this space. And renting is now such a huge part of the local property market that we need to plan and provision for this as part of local policy, national policy, and it gives people an ability to rent in a place. And in terms of choice for users, we're just filling that sort of unmet need, whereas there's loads of houses for sale, there's houses for affordable tenures. Build to rent is really that sort of last space, which allows people to be able to rent in places where they may not necessarily want to buy, or take away that barrier to entry in terms of a deposit if they want to rent.
Thanks very much, Rory. We've covered a lot of ground between the four of you. Obviously, Rory brought in some sort of new things as well. I think education. Obviously, trying to establish what is a relatively new product with a community and those that will end up renting. Interested to hear about your surveys and that those are accessible on site. And being generous with your time. This is not something that can be rushed. I'm going to ask Hadar again to pop another poll up, our second and last of the day. And whilst our audience completes that, perhaps get into a bit of discussion. We've talked about sort of the public in generic terms, but within that sort of generic term, obviously various different audiences. I wondered if you could draw out any sort of best practice in terms of reaching a particular sort of demographic within the sort of broader public, as we term it. Does anybody want to take that? James, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I could start off. So I think, again, it depends on the project, but we typically like to segment our audience depending on sort of proximity and relevance to the project. So, for example, we would have key local interest groups, stakeholders, and near neighbours that we would look to engage with early and in a multi-stage way, because they're the ones that are most impacted by development. And that would be to work out understand their priorities and concerns. And then, local groups could be anything from business improvement districts, heritage groups, neighbourhood and resident forums, significant neighbours such as churches, schools, GPs. These people are key supporters or objectives, and it's vital to talk to them early and try and get them on side and understand what their concerns and priorities are. Then we would sort of look to cast a wider net typically, which is where you would go to the wider community and inform them of the proposals, but not necessarily seek a co-design kind of approach. So, for example, on a project in the University of Greenwich, I think we contacted close to 5,000 residents on that project recently, but then on a project on New Bond Street in Westminster, which is a lot smaller, we only contacted 200. It really depends on the context and how, what's surrounding a project. But in terms of diversity, it's really important to target hard to reach groups and underrepresented cohorts in society. And a lot of what Millie does at Just Build Homes does that in terms of attracting supporters and renters. But it is also important to contact them during the inception phase of a project. And a lot of local groups can help facilitate engagement with hard to reach groups and underrepresented cohorts. So we will typically seek to identify those local groups, whether they're charities or community organizations, and invite them to specific events to inform them of the proposals and have a chat about what's being proposed, as well as supplementing with social media advertising and outreach as well.
Millie, would you say you're targeting a particular demographic, or are you trying to reach as many people as you can?
Yeah, so with Shared Voice, we have different products for different stages of the planning process. Through Good Neighbour, we seek to notify people in the area of the benefits that the new development could bring to their area. So that's the kind of spreading the good news far and wide. But within Just Build Homes, that's where we really focus on talking to people that stand the most to gain from new homes going ahead. And if you'd asked me this question 3 years ago about who they are, I probably would have said 25 to 35-year-olds renters, inner cities. But more and more, we're seeing a trend of parents, grandparents worried about their families being able to stay close to them in the local area, or just wanting them to move out of the family home because they've been stuck there into their 30s. So we also are hearing a lot from people in their 40s and 50s who are still aspiring towards home ownership, but struggling with the high costs of rent. And ultimately, we found that when you go into a community, everyone has a story to share, and everyone knows someone that's affected by the housing crisis. And we just need to change the way that we're speaking about development to make sure that those voices are heard.
Thanks very much, Millie. Can I ask Hadar if she could post the results of the second poll? There we have. So yeah, clear winner there, which is impact on local services. 54% of our audience believe that is what local people rate as their most important factor when they see a development coming into their locality. Interestingly, given the emphasis of the previous government's work, aesthetics, beauty down at 2%. Affordability, perhaps chiming with some of what Millie's just said, a factor, and then again the sort of infrastructure and ensuring that the development is sort of contributing to alleviate some of that. I'm guessing through planning obligations, and local authority itself is mindful of that. Just taking the results of that poll, any surprises there for Ben or Rory as developers in the room?
I think from my perspective, I'd say it's no surprises really. I guess it depends where you develop, and this may be less of an issue in parts of central London and stuff, but in my experience, parking always comes up, and people are opposed based on parking and kind of the transport and traffic impacts of that. Again, I think it comes back to Rory's point about educating people on how that works, and because often traffic generation from new developments is very, very minimal, and people don't necessarily appreciate that. But there are things you can do to listen to specific examples of where parking may be a problem. We've got a development we're doing in Greater Manchester at the moment where there's some elements of on-street parking, and people don't want to lose that as we develop homes nearby. But by over-providing other aspects of parking and other benefits, you can try to sell that to local residents. In terms of the aesthetics and beauty, I think we very rarely get comments from people about the designs of our developments, but we do try to engage with local groups and local stakeholder groups, as well as members and kind of specialists within the local authorities, to try and sell the benefits of our designs. We work a lot in Trafford in Greater Manchester, and they have a design code, and just the early engagement with them and with the members around how we're seeking to meet that design code can really help to then explain that to local residents, that we are pitching the quality of this at a very high standard to meet local requirements, and it isn't just kind of homes chucked up, as some people may perceive to be the case.
Thanks, Ben. And Rory?
Yeah, no major surprises for me. I'll echo Ben's sentiments there. It is always amazing to me how everyone becomes an expert in highways engineering as soon as a planning submission is made. It's one of those things we really need to tackle, actually, is the parking piece. Where, similar to Ben, we've often sort of over provided on parking, provided additional visitor spaces, that kind of thing, to try and appease local residents. But when you look at sort of your sustainability hat and the way things are going, you look at countries like New Zealand have just introduced maximum parking standards as opposed to minimum parking standards, as they look to move away towards sort of more sustainable transport, public transport that way. But generally, what we find is people's concerns are around the fact that 100 new homes are coming to an area. All of a sudden, there's going to be 200 cars parking on this scheme, all leaving at 9 o'clock, all arriving home at 5 p.m. And people are just scared about this, but they actually don't realize that the net impact is very, very minimal compared to what they sort of catastrophize in their heads. So for me, it's back to that education piece, fronting up, explaining to them why the impact isn't as great, and again the benefits of having additional homes, affordability, places for people to stay, how that outweighs any sort of concerns on parking provision and other such matters.
Thanks, Rory. I was going to move us on to as I said at the start, we've sort of chosen you because as a panel, because you're doing different things, and I wondered, you've sort of brought it out slightly in your opening comments, but yeah, do different kinds of development, face different hurdles. You touched on sort of education. I think Ben had touched on trying to explain some of the differences between different affordable tenures, which are not well known by perhaps the general public in terms of supported housing and shared ownership. Yeah, does that do different types of development play out differently with the local community? Ben, yeah.
Yeah, I think in our experience, and often we will deliver in a mixed tenure way, similar to how Rory described, but you'll find that there'll be different concerns in different areas to certain tenures. And I said about myth busting before, we have it often where people will come with kind of views already formed about, oh, well, if these are going to be social rent homes, that means there'll be these challenges and I won't be able to do this and I'll have this kind of problem. And it is important that we do explain to people what that means, who that will be benefiting, what kind of tenancies people are on, and the requirements and obligations within that tenancy. And there have been cases in the past where we've pointed out that actually, if you have a rented tenant next door on a tenancy agreement, if they don't comply with the terms of their tenancy agreement, or they are conducting antisocial behaviour or something like that, there are means in which to rehouse them and support them through that process, as opposed to somebody buying a house next door to you and entering into antisocial behaviour and stuff like that. There's nothing you can do. So there's a lot of education that we do with residents, and a lot of people talk about access to home ownership and things like that, and we deliver a lot of shared ownership. Many people that we deal with at these kind of consultation events don't understand the fundamentals of shared ownership, and so it's important that we explain that to them and how that works. And I think it comes back to Millie's point at the start that really there's a huge group of people who are priced out and then don't necessarily have the kind of awareness and knowledge to engage in this process properly, to share their views. So having someone like Just Build Homes to kind of pull those together and shout about and kind of this kind of, they're not a forgotten group, but they're sort of a silent group in the planning process, is really valuable. But educating people as you go along the way, I think, is really important as well.
We'll come to Q&A in a moment. We got I think six questions in there, so don't want to miss out on the Q&A.
Can I add to that, Ian?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of the conversations about appeasing the community about like the types of development, it's again just this tiny portion of the community that isn't going to change their mind about development, because amongst the people that we speak to, there is a really strong recognition that we need to build more homes of all types to solve the housing crisis. And things like community benefits are almost welcome, but ultimately we find the key reasons why people want to support more homes to be simply addressing the local housing shortage and addressing younger people, helping younger people to get on the housing ladder, which you can only do if you build more homes. And I think a good example of this is we worked on a later living project and we weren't quite sure what the reaction would be, but ultimately we ended up generating over 200 letters of support, because there was a recognition that by building specialised later living accommodation, you're freeing up family homes for the next generation of homeowners. And affordability is another thing. People talk about affordability in terms of what they can afford. People support affordable housing, but it's different to everyone. There isn't a big understanding about what affordable actually is. So, and the only thing that I think we have found slightly more difficult to generate support for is student housing, because ultimately if sometimes there's concerns about students living next door to you, which is fair enough. I was a student once, I recognised why that might be slightly more unpopular, but ultimately our community will support any development because they recognise that that's what we need to do to build the homes for everyone that needs them.
Thanks, Melly. I'd wanted to sort of touch on technology. Obviously, Millie, you're using technology to some extent, but you'd also, in your opening remarks, sort of talked about sort of some of the planning portals not being particularly sort of user friendly. Is technology an enabler in this space, or sometimes a hindrance to better community consultation?
Yeah, it's definitely enabled more development, but it doesn't go far enough at all. I think as a bare minimum, planning portal should somewhere to house supportive comments and options to support a development. I think sometimes the language is do not object rather than support, and things like that should be changed as a starting point. But it also should be simpler and smoother and more accessible for people that perhaps don't have a background in planning or development, so that people can understand. And our approach with Just Build Homes is digitally led because it enables us to engage and motivate this group of people effectively in a way that they wouldn't have been reached before. And although there is the argument that things like Facebook pages foster negativity, I think that that's fine. People have a right to object and they have the right to communicate their concerns. But I think the more that we focus on engaging supportive voices digitally, the playing field's leveled and everyone has their voice heard about development.
A positive thing overall. It's about making sure the technology is used well. And final sort of question before we get into Q&A. You touched on some of you members, and I suppose there's sometimes a view in the industry that you can do all the good community consultation in the world, but ultimately it's the members that decide, and sometimes the members can go against all your best efforts. Examples possibly from James and Rory, Ben, perhaps on the on good engagement with members, and perhaps turning around a situation where members were not supportive but became so.
Yeah, I can start off. In perfect timing as someone vacuuming just stopped near me, so shouldn't be any background noise. So when it comes to member engagement, again, it is really project dependent. But typically what we do is engage the local planning authority, board councillors, parish town councillors first as local representatives, because they can be key advocates of proposals, or they can be powerful opposers as well if they're to speak at planning committee or mobilise the community and be part of a community campaign against proposals. So it's important to understand how they perceive the priorities of their local community and work productively with them. We'd also look to typically engage relevant planning authority portfolio holders, leader, planning, housing, regeneration portfolios. We would engage them at an early stage to identify and try and demonstrate alignment with council priorities, particularly if there's a feasible possibility of a council administration forming a position of support for your proposals, which provides some certainty when you go to planning committee that you've got some broader support. Obviously, the member for parliament can also be brought in if it's more of a substantial scheme that they might want to be engaged with. But across the board, really, it's vital to demonstrate to elected representatives that you understand and you're listening to their communities, whilst also finding space for their suggestions and ideas and responding in a really strong, robust way to any concerns or perhaps misinformation that they might be taking on board from the community and other people in their ear. At the end of the day, they're thinking about the ramifications of, well, what happens if I support this scheme? Will I win the next election? So they're always minded to, what's my next point of reference in terms of how popular I am So you have to try and win that popularity context in a way. When it comes to the planning committee, it's a bit more sensitive. There are restrictions and parameters around how you can and should engage with planning committee members. Typically, it's done through officers because planning committee members can't show bias before making a decision on an application. But we do like to typically work with officers to organise pre-briefings before committee to make sure that members have a really thorough understanding of the scheme, and they, sometimes they don't read their briefing papers before the planning committee. So it's really imperative to try and build their understanding as much as possible. We'll also prepare fact sheets that we'll distribute to members before committee, which get our arguments across for why development should occur and why an application should be approved. We'll speak at committee, much like Millie does as well. It's really powerful to deliver those messages face to face at a committee too, and support officers with any tricky sort of Q&A to make sure that when officers respond to questions from members on committees, they give a robust answer, and it convinces members that that's the right thing to support.
Yeah,
yeah.
I was going to add to that. Like, that was really comprehensive what James has covered there, and I'd agree that all of those things are really useful, particularly where you demonstrate how your proposals can align with the council's own strategies and plans, or their aims, because they love to be able to kind of point to something that they've helped enable and show how that's contributing to their improvement or aims for their area. And one thing that we found a real benefit from is engaging with local ward members very early in the process, and trying to find out what their views are, even possibly before you may have your own ideas, but you wouldn't necessarily share them with them at the start, because then they can be an advocate for you if you've given them some information that's really valuable, and they can use that when they're engaging with their local residents who come to them. But it's helpful to point out that where, for example, they might have local residents approach them saying, I've been on the waiting list for a long time for a property, or I'm living in overcrowded accommodation because my child can't move out, or I've got these issues in another place. By helping to support this development and by doing that in a proactive, constructive way, the local ward members are contributing to a solution to that problem. There is obviously politics that comes into it at times, and we have found sometimes it's a tricky balance where certain politicians will see us as a housing association and you just need to build as much affordable housing as possible. So it's also important for us to explain that mixed communities have a range of tenures in. We need to generate profit from market sale homes in order to cross-subsidise affordable ones. And I think on the whole, people, once that's been explained to them, do understand and do engage and buy in with it. So it's quite unusual for us to have a position where we don't have ward members on board. But I think where that has happened will be when they're kind of the last to know, or they feel that they haven't been kept informed enough, and then they're having to kind of defend a position that they might have set out with local residents without all the information at the start.
Yeah, but it's a perennial challenge, I suppose, and our job is trying to illustrate how development is funded and the consequences of that. Good points. Let's turn, because we've got quite a lot of questions coming, so I'm keen to sort of tackle those. The first, possibly one for you, Millie. You'd sort of, I think, given one or two examples in your opening remarks, but how often does a scheme genuinely change as a result of community engagement response, and does that make a difference to bringing along and integrating the existing community?
Yeah, so my perspective of this is more when it comes to decision about the scheme. We have the Good Neighbour offer with shared voice, but I'm not as involved with that bit of work. But essentially, I've noticed a lot on the narrative around development changing as a result of the community being brought into the conversation and people sharing their reasons why they want to see more homes go ahead. We've run things like social media campaigns where we'll share quotes from local people about what they have said about why they want to see more homes in the community. And we find this really helps when it comes to the committee, because there's more of a positive story being told about the need for new homes.
Thanks, Billy. Anybody? And Philip's second question as well sort of flows from that, which is, does the panel have any examples where it's been the case that sort of storytelling, individual sort of stories have sort of tipped the balance in terms of decision making?
I can maybe add a little bit to Millie. So in terms of early engagement and shaping proposals, I think absolutely there. I've worked with projects and clients who have started with more of a blank sheet of paper in terms of what they'd like to deliver on a site, and being guided by the community and key stakeholders in terms of building and finalizing that product. But we also work with other clients who have a very set view of what they want to deliver on a site. And my preference is to work with clients who have that lesser form view, but I understand real estate is a commercial, commercially driven entity, and sometimes there are limitations of what you can deliver on sites that varies from what you deliver on other sites. I think in terms of where we've seen success, there's a specific example I can think of a co-living scheme in Woking, which we delivered engagement for Halcyon and JRL, and they very early on in the piece engaged a local charity that is currently a tenant on the site to design a new premises for them as part of that new co-living scheme. And that really acted as a catalyst to mobilize the community in support of that proposal, and kind of negated, I think, some of the fears or uncertainties around co-living as a product, because it was the first co-living scheme to get planning permission in Woking. So working with the community to develop community-driven solutions can be a really great way of mobilizing support and minimizing objections, and that's sort of one example.
Thanks, James. Moving on to another James. James Pargeter has asked a question about not only the sort of local community, but particularly in the context of things like build to rent, single family, trying to mobilise future residents. And I'm always struck, a lot of residents, and particularly single family, are local people that are moving from perhaps a substandard private rented sector offer to a single family offer. Rory, have you tried in any way to sort of mobilize future residents, try to illustrate, I suppose, about better quality PRS offer, trying to get those people involved?
Probably not necessarily future residents. I mean, our view is anyone who's in rented or even in for sale, it could be a future resident. In terms of one of our big successes for sort of getting members on board and communities on board is the amount of successful communities that we have built across the country, and been able to use those and showcase them with local authorities via site tours, or even just offering them the chance to drive around the local estate and say, well, you can see it with your eyes, the success of these communities that we've built up and down the country. We're very fortunate that we have over 100 developments across the country, and generally we've got the proof is in the pudding with the real evidence of what we've achieved in these locations, some of which were very sort of challenging from an socio-economic perspective. And as part of that triple tenure approach with affordable and private sale, we've been able to transform these people and create sort of proper bits of regeneration across the country.
Thanks. For a little story. I met the junior housing minister about 10 months ago, Jacob Young, and I'd sort of prepared my standard sort of build to rent single family sort of presentation, and he'd visited one of your developments in Stock, and I sort of was about to launch into my presentation, and he said, "Oh, I know Sigma Development, Stockton. It's great. Really supportive of it." And that visit spoke 1,000 words in terms of my pros and presentation. So yeah, trying to get people.
It's something we try and do a lot of, but it's not practical to do it for everyone. But it is something we're really, really proud of, and something we try and sort of do as much as possible.
Yeah, and certainly accommodated us on a few occasions, which I'm grateful for. Next question. How do you navigate the challenge of bringing disparate or polarized communities together? Is there a sort of a natural sort of arbiter or mediator, both in short and long term? I think some of you are sort of in discussions at Millie, because of you're wanting to come in, perhaps.
I was just going to touch on the previous question as well. Just on that, I think it's the benefit of Just Build Homes is that because we're not the developer, we're able to communicate with communities. I think we're sometimes more of a trusted messenger, And we've found that we're able to bring people along for the whole journey of a planning application. So we a lot of the time do like an evidence base of what genuine local people think about a certain type of development, so co-living for perhaps. If people indicate that that's something that they are genuinely interested in, we can then go back to them when there's a co-living development in their area. And then when that's built, the developer can then invite them to come and look around the finished product. And it's like more of communicating with people that have taken the time to support your development. A lot of the time there's no follow-up with them, but because we have them as a part of our community, we can go back to them with things that they might be interested in when the houses are ready as well.
I'm guessing too, and Ben had touched on it, that well, there isn't that sort of natural sort of locus. You can sort of almost create it yourself. So, which your example to some extent is illustrating, Millie. And I think Ben had sort of mentioned a community interest group that they'd sort of set up to continue to sort of manage community facilities going forward.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think in our experience, where we have had some of these bigger long-term regeneration projects, some of which are kind of big new developments on former industrial land and stuff like that, where there might be objections from local people who already live around the area, versus regeneration of existing estates where people are more directly affected and may have to move or maybe kind of rehoused as part of that process. It is really important to kind of help build capacity within those communities so that they understand what they're going to be experiencing, that they know that developers and others can respond during that period to try to help that process be as smooth as possible, and then to help to build the links with new residents that may come in as a result. Because sort of relatively speaking, we're only involved in these areas for quite a short space of time, albeit a housing association and a build to rent landlord will hold the properties for a long time. And it's important that the communities are established and well supported, and that there's resilience during that process, because there's lots of ups and downs, kind of lots of excitement at the planning stage and look at what you can have, and then there's obviously the build period where people might be more inconvenienced on a day-to-day basis, but having the resilience and support, and we will often make allowances in our budgets to fund things like that as well, and I think that can make a big difference.
Thanks, Ben. Next, we've got, maybe I'll group a couple of questions together, which I think are predominantly aimed at Millie. One is whether, as an organisation, you engage in local plan making at also at that sort of earlier stage of the planning process. And Graham's question as well had been, would you want to be sort of proactively consulted? Is there a resource, I suppose, Millie, to be able to do that in terms of being a not a statutory consultee, but at least people acknowledging that you can contribute to the debate.
Yeah, so we have worked on local plan in Scotland. So we worked with a developer to involve supported voices in the local plan and find out what they wanted to see in their area, and that was very successful. So it's definitely something that we can look at. And in terms of being consulted on new major planning applications, we work on planning applications like individual schemes. We work with the community and we generate support for individual projects. So we work with developers scheme by scheme basis, essentially.
Thank you. But Ty's question there, which I won't put for discussion, but perhaps Rory could put in the written answers just which local authority had adopted the maximum parking standard, and respond to that one. We've got George's question. I'm a student performing my dissertation research into housing development in a national park setting, the South Downs, and would be interested to know whether any of the panel had experiences with development in a national park, and the particular context of that in terms of aesthetics, beauty, character, heritage, etc.
Yeah, we've done some schemes in not necessarily national parks, but areas of natural beauty or near areas of natural beauty. And I mean, the differences in terms of community views are similar to Greenfield. Still, the themes are key views, loss of nature, biodiversity, flooding, character, rural character, all those sorts of themes come up prominently, and are not dissimilar to where you might be closer to an AONB or National Park as well. There tend to be those common themes in Greenfield and AONB development. And they're hard to convince people that,
Thank you.
We've done quite a lot of work around the South Downs, and you'll find that these areas are also more expensive. And the more expensive an area is, the more likely it is that there's younger people there who can't afford to stay in the local area. So I would say that although you are more likely to find people that are concerned about the beauty of the area, there will be a large portion of the population that are struggling with the housing crisis that probably aren't being spoken to when those projects come to fruition.
Grant, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to, unfortunately, be able to take the last 3 or 4 questions. If anybody on the panel would like to type a written answer to those, then I'm sure the askers would be grateful. I'd wanted just to finish on, I suppose, a positive note, a note in terms of contributing something back to the audience, and ask you each for one sort of tip for our audience in terms of sort of engagement and what we've discussed over the last hour. Where to start? Shall I start with Rory?
No problem, Ian. It's just give your time generously to people. Just that education piece, as I've touched on a number of times. Give your time generously. People want to understand generally, and once you explain to them, you take that fear away, and it generally becomes an easier conversation at that point.
Thank you. And James?
Yeah, I think there's really no sort of one-size-fits-all approach to engagement. You have to respond to and understand the context within which you're working. And I think one other sort of little snippet is, technology is fantastic for engagement, but I still don't think it replaces a good face-to-face conversation with the community over a cup of tea and a biscuit, and just explaining what it is you're proposing to do and talking through their priorities and their concerns.
Thanks, James. And Ben?
I'd agree with that. I think in our experience, having drop-in meetings where you can chat to people face-to-face is more successful. Not necessarily a meeting where you get a big group all kind of facing you. But I think kind of one thing that's worked for us is to go into it with an open mind. You will have a proposal, you will have a model that works for you, but to listen genuinely to people's concerns and to try and respond to those. And I think sometimes adapting or making small adaptations to a proposal can win round so much favour that it starts to get some of those objectors start to support. But coming back to Millie's point, some people will always object, and for them I think it's important to have the opposite voice.
Final words to our partners, Millie.
Mine, very simple. If you want to build the homes for the next generation of homeowners, you'll have to involve them in the conversation first.
Thank you. Been a fascinating discussion. Hours has passed really quickly. Really grateful to our audience for joining us this morning. Enjoy your days, everybody. I hope we've shone a bit of light on some of the challenges and opportunities around community engagement. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.